and welcome to the last session before we go to the ballpark. I'm very excited myself. I actually grew up in Greensboro and haven't been to the ballpark, and it is relatively new, so everybody should come out and put your name in, especially girls who can throw. I can't, so I won't. I'm absolutely delighted to have Dr. Pat Mitchell with us today. This is actually the third time now that we've had her agency come and explain to our local governments who are actually the recipients of the technical assistance and the grants coming from her agency. So we've now been to the managers, we've been to the finance officers, and our last stop at the budget officials. Y'all may recall in last year's budget, and I have to say last year's state budget since we're in a new fiscal year and we don't have a new state budget yet, so we're operating off the second year of the biennium. But one of the priorities of Governor McCrory was to sweep all off revenues away from specific line items, not through the appropriations process, bringing that all in-house and then appropriating those dollars out. At the same time, there was lots of expose, if you remember, a lot of charges in terms of inadequate oversight for some non-profit agencies that were actually administering grants on behalf of the state. So all of that was swept up into last year's state budget as well. So all of those things coupled together created a brand new division in the Department of Commerce, and Dr. Pat Mitchell is overseeing that, was hired to take care of that. And also as a part of that was a new authority set up to help in terms of setting up that new grants making process. So we are absolutely delighted that the Secretary of Commerce, Secretary Decker, tagged Dr. Mitchell, Pat is what we call her because we consider her a friend, to be the Assistant Secretary to head up that new division because she has strong roots in local government, having served as county manager in Ashe County, as well as the Economic Development Director in Ashe County as well. For those of you who don't know your geography, first of all, shame on y'all being on North Carolina, but Ashe County is actually where Jefferson and West Jefferson is located, up in our lovely, lovely mountains areas up in the Northwest. So she was appointed the Assistant Secretary of the North Carolina Department of Commerce's the new Rural Economic Development Division in September 2013. She had served prior to that, as I mentioned, 9 years as Economic Development Director for Ashe County, so has lots of expertise, and 2 years as Ashe County Manager. She is a former professor at East Carolina University and currently teaches as an adjunct professor at the Master of Public Administration program over at Appalachian. I know she's already had a number of students come up and say, oh, you taught me in specific class. Within the Rural Division, Pat is responsible for the following programs: CDBG Economic Development Grants. I know a number of y'all take advantage of that. Building Reuse and Economic Infrastructure Rural Grants. The Division of Community Assistance was moved under her. The NC Main Street Program Youth Cities, the Appalachian Regional Commission, and the Industrial Development Fund. She works with a 15-member board, appointed authority, and her grant-making responsibilities. She also serves on a number of boards. One of the components we've had in some of the earlier sessions, and we would have had here, was also hearing from the Rural Infrastructure Division, another new grants program, but they're actually holding their board meeting today, could not join us. But Pat actually serves on that board in terms of making those as well. And she holds a master and doctorate degree in public administration from the University of Georgia, go Dogs, and holds the Certified Economic Developer distinction from the International Economic Development Council. Today, Pat's going to talk to you about her new division, the components of it, the opportunities for grants, and then she's going to touch on a couple of highlights in terms of how North Carolina is totally restructuring economic development through a bill that was passed in the General Assembly, signed into law by Governor McCrory, I guess it was about 3 weeks ago. We've now created a public-private partnership for economic development. She's going to be talking on that. So, Dr. Mitchell, thank you so much for coming.
Good afternoon. Can y'all hear me? Okay, this is a challenge for me. I have one of these mics on. I have been known to be mic'd like this and then leave the room and carry on all kinds of private conversations, come back into the room and somebody say, Pat, you're mic'd. And then I have 2 screens to look at and a screen up here, so I'm going to try and be as coordinated as I can. I won't promise you anything. Do they have some former students in the room, and that always delights me? Marcus, I'm not sure why you're hiding back there in the corner. I'm sure there's...
If you're going to continue playing the role as teacher, I'm going to sit in the back.
Well, that's what I'm going to try to do. I am delighted to be here this afternoon, not just to talk about commerce, but both my master's and my doctorate, my major field was public budgeting. Fell in love with public budgeting when, before I went to grad school. I'm one of those sort of late bloomers. I went back to Georgia in the mid-90s after I served a 4-year term on a Metro Atlanta school board. And when we would get the budget documents for the school system, there were 4 documents, all about 1.5 inches, 2 inches thick. And I just thought that was the most interesting thing I've ever read, and I'm serious about that. So I was glad to talk about people that are involved in budgeting or interested in budgeting. And I'll open my comments, not that this has anything to do with commerce, but I think it's important to hear and recognize people who work with budgets and work with public finance information. The budget document is the most important policy document that a government has, whether we're talking state government, whether we're talking local government, but everything government does, if we define policy as everything a government does or does not do, if we're doing it, there's a reason. If we're not doing it, there's a reason. Sometimes there's always intended and unintended consequences with the reason or the non-reason for doing it, with the public budget and the information and the job that you do for local governments and for the institution, entities you work for. Very, very important work, and I am delighted to be here. I am going to talk about the structure of the rural division. I'm going to show you an org chart that I'll spend a few minutes on and explain that that's where the grants are in state government right now. Not the one North Carolina, not the JDIG, because those are not in my division. Those are what I call the big incentive programs that are run out of Commerce Finance. But the rural division, the ones that towns and counties try to access for building reuse or for technical assistance or for economic infrastructure. And we'll see if we can operate this too. Okay. The Rural Economic Development Division, which was created by legislation a year ago, actually went into effect July 1. I came in September last year. They did not have the Rural Infrastructure Authority appointed until, I guess, mid-November. We got all our appointments. So it was only in December of this past year that we actually started running our grants programs. This is what we are all about. Our mission is to invest in community and economic development in initiatives in rural areas across North Carolina. Most often, but not in every one of my programs, the areas that we work in, you can equate to Tier 1 and Tier 2 counties. In the rural counties, I'm in the most distressed counties, and typically we're talking Tier 1, Tier 2. So I can do a building reuse grant in a Tier 1, Tier 2 county. I cannot use building reuse money in a Tier 3 county. Economic infrastructure for my rural grants programs, I can work in a Tier 3 county. I'm not sure why they did it that way, but that is the way they did it. The org chart, I'll have to stand back here and look at it myself. This is the structure when the rural division was created, the structure that the assistant or the secretary of commerce placed under me. So directly under me, I have an operations manager and I have my administrative assistant. My operations manager, and probably there's some in the room that may know him, he's the retired county manager and economic developer for Washington County. Did a lot of the budgeting in Washington County. David Peoples came in to me about December 1st. He has been a lifesaver, both for understanding. We found when we came to the state, both of us after several years of county experience, state budgets differently than the counties do, so we sort of have to put it in county terms, and then we can sort of work towards the state terms. But David has been very valuable understanding towns and counties as we try to move the rural division forward and having that understanding. The secretary also placed under the rural division. The legislation does not do this, but this is how the secretary chose to organize the rural division. I have the CDBG Economic Development Grant Program under me. The rural grants, and I'll talk a little bit more about each of these. The rural grants, and I'll say something specific about the Rural Center. The Appalachian Regional Commission, the ARC, North Carolina Main Street Program, which some of you may know. Officially, the name of that program is Office of Urban Development, but we refer to it as the Main Street Program. And then the Industrial Development Fund, which also is really one of the state fund that the state incentives tap into quite often. Last year, when they created the Rural Division, the legislature also decided to take Division of Community Assistance, CDBG money, the type of programs, scattered site housing, economic catalyst, all of those programs that were run out of the Division of Community Assistance. They took $25 million that we get from HUD that went to those grants programs and take that away from the Division of Community Assistance and send it over to DENR for critical water infrastructure needs. That's the authority meeting, the board meeting I was at this morning. So $25 million that DCA previously had to do the kinds of programs that you've probably kept records and written checks for before no longer exists in DCA, and though DCA is officially under me. However, they didn't take all of the $44 million that HUD sends us. About $16 million is with the CDBG Economic Development. So we can do building reuse, we can do economic infrastructure with CDBG money. Many of you have probably worked with or know George Sherrill, and that is George Sherrill's program. But that is where that grant money, that is federal money that comes to CDBG strictly for economic development. We're very restricted in how we can use it and how it's granted out. The rural grants and planning, that planning word that I added in there, is what's left of, as I'm going to reorganize it, DCA, the planning function of DCA. The CDBG, the existing grants that were there for scattered site and all of that, still is at DCA, the existing grants. We will make very few new grants. The only way we can make new grants at DCA is if we have some de-obligated money, and some folks over at the legislature or in the state budget office allows us to make new grants with that. But we currently have about probably 250 existing grants, CDBG, scattered site housing, and all of those left, and my grants managers are managing those programs. The planning function that I want to put under the rural grants programs are those community planners that are spread across the state. Right now, there were 5 offices. We closed the Fayetteville office when the chief planner down there retired, but we have a planning office in Asheville, in Winston-Salem. We have one in Washington, and there is also a Raleigh office. So the community planners that work for DCA in that division, it shows up on this org chart under the rural grants programs. ARC serves 29 western counties in North Carolina. That is a 13-state federal commission. They do have grant money. Typically, we'll grant $2–3 million a year. Can be project money, can be technical assistance grants. Olivia Collier is the program manager for the ARC in North Carolina, appointed out of the governor's office. I serve as the governor's alternate to the commission and attend the policy meetings and the other federal commission if the governor is not there. And typically there's 1 or 2 meetings a year that he does attend, and then I do not sit with the commission. North Carolina Main Street Program, how many of y'all are in communities that are either small town Main Street or Main Street programs? I see a few hands across the audience. They have those 2 programs. They also have the Main Street Solutions Fund, which is a grant program for rehab building, facade, technical assistance, grant program that was started in 2009. If I stand before you next year, I don't know whether we will have that fund or not in the Senate budget. They have wiped out the Solutions Fund and put that money in administration. In the House budget, they have taken $1 million from the Industrial Development Fund and placed into the Solutions Fund. because that is in contention. Until we have a state budget, I have no idea whether we will continue to have that grant program. I certainly want money in that program. I'm not sure I want it coming out of IDF, but if that's where it comes from, that's where it comes from, and we'll be glad to have it. The CDBG, which showed on that org chart, awards grants for public infrastructure improvements, forgivable loans for building renovation, shell building construction. These are to local units of government. You have to partner with a for-profit business. It is a job creation grant or retaining jobs. Since my rural authority was appointed and we began meeting in December, and this rural authority is a 15-member politically appointed board, 5 governor, 5 House, 5 Senate. Our first meeting was December 6th. We met again on December 18th. We met again January 15th, and I've had 2 meetings since then. If they knew they were going to get 2 meetings in right during the, coming up to the holidays, I'm not sure they would have wanted to serve, but they were very gracious with their time, because the rural authority members are spread across the state. Since we began meeting in December under the CDBG Economic Development, the authority has awarded 13 grants for almost $8 million, and there's a commitment of 845 jobs with those grants. The rural grants and planning, when the legislature created us, the legislature essentially closed to public funding. They're certainly not closed, and they're operating. The North Carolina Rural Center. How many of y'all have worked with the Rural Center in your positions or your governments have? Okay, several hands out across. Before I was appointed to as Assistant Secretary, I sat on the Rural Center Board for 7 years, believed very much in what the Rural Center did and a great deal of the fine work that they did. I resigned from the board when I was appointed for potential conflict of interest. The legislature, as of June 30th, actually a year ago, placed no more public money into the Rural Center. So all of the grants that existed at the Rural Center came over to my division. And so when you saw on the org chart, the rural grants and plannings, we have new grants that we are allowed to issue. We also inherited 557 Rural Center grants totaling about $72 million. About 450 of those grants were open, active grants. And the grants managers that work for me, that are doing our new grants, also are managing the former Rural Center grants. For those that have worked with Rural Center programs, if you've worked with any of those granting programs, you might recognize the name of Melody Adams, who did the building reuse, George Collier, who did economic infrastructure, and Hazel Edmond, who worked with the building reuse. Those grants managers also transitioned over to me and are now Department of Commerce employees. Very, very fine staff of individuals working in that program. Since we began granting in December under the rural grants, and this is strictly new building reuse and economic infrastructure grants, we've awarded 36 grants for over $8 million with over 1,000 jobs committed for those grants programs. We have had, I got into, well, I won't say a controversy, I got into a discussion. That's what I got into with a county manager who did not get a grant that they had applied for. And it was of the opinion of this individual that you apply for the grant, you get the grant. Well, that's just not quite how grant life works. And so of the 36 grants that we have approved here, we have actually run 49 grants through in front of the Rural Authority, and for one reason or another, they were not recommended. That process is my grants manager takes them in, there's pre-app calls, they score and evaluate the grant applications. We go out and we personally look at the projects, the building reuse ones, and there's a great deal of criteria involved there. Number one, we want to make sure that there's a reasonable expectation they'll create the jobs that they've committed to. We want to assure that if there's other funding involved, and there always has to be other funding involved, they've got the means to do that. And if there's something that just does not make sense to my grants managers, then we do not award. We take a recommendation to the authority. We recommend, here's the project, we recommend this would not be funded. Out of 49, we have funded 36 of those. If you look at the distribution across the state, if it's a 1, there's 1 project in there. You'll see there's a 2 on some of these counties. Areas, that means they have more than 1 grant in that county. But that is the distribution of the 36 rural grants, the building reuse economic infrastructure grants that have been awarded. Now, there's one sure way not to get awarded a grant. Listen up and take this back to your local government entities. If you don't apply, you're not going to get awarded. Now, if you apply, doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get awarded, but we are looking at good projects that can move the needle in rural communities as far as building reuse and the economic infrastructure. We want local governments to apply for these grants. We want to see good projects coming into us. My grants managers are more than willing to do the work it takes to work up those projects, have the calls that we need to make, but we want good projects. So, as mentioned earlier, there's 13 projects not on this map because of some fault with the grant application. I'm going to go back for a second on this one. If you look at, there's an asterisk by the word vacant. One of the legislative changes that we asked for this year, when I say we, the Rural Division, with the support of the Secretary of Commerce, right now the legislation says that we can grant to vacant buildings and properties. I tried to interpret properties meaning occupied buildings. Our attorney said I didn't need to be rulemaking that way. So vacant means vacant. So right now on building reuse, we can only work in vacant buildings. There's 3 different occasions I've gone to someplace in the state because a developer will call me up and say, Pat, this building's vacant. That end down there that has activity in it, that's really not part of the building. Come and look and see if you don't think this building's vacant. I went into one in the West and there was activity all throughout, about 200,000 square feet. We have asked for that change. The legislation's written, it's been introduced, it's over there. Rebecca has helped us with it, but it's caught up in that budget process and it is not signed into legislation. So we are hoping that that legislation will be tweaked so it says vacant and occupied, or just drop the word vacant so that we can work in buildings. And then if somebody has, whether it's a manufacturing firm, a restaurant, some other entity, and they want to expand or they want to enhance and they're going to add jobs, then we can grant to that too. But right now, we cannot do it. The developer in the West calls me every week and asks if that legislation has been signed yet, and it hasn't, so we're stuck until it is signed. The ARC, the Appalachian Regional Commission, was formed by Congress in 1965. It is to address a 13-state Appalachia area on quality of life issues and also economic enhancement. It's a federal-state partnership. We have to put some money into it. Serves, as I said, the 29 counties in North Carolina are eligible. The very western counties are eligible. A lot of great training, technical assistance, and projects that are there. When I first took this job, I think the second week I was in it, I was down in Southport. How many of y'all know where Southport is down on the beach? Okay, some of y'all. I mean, it's right there. I could look out there and I could see the ocean.
Brunswick County.
Okay, Brunswick County, thank you. So I'm doing this, a somewhat similar presentation, not exactly. And so when I come to the ARC slide explaining that that's under my division, I turn to this lady that's sitting like right here. And I turn to her and I say, now do you have ARC money down here? And then I'm realizing what I'm saying, that I'm very far from 29 western counties. Sincerely hoping she either doesn't know what it is, or the floor could open and consume me. But again, 29 western counties. The North Carolina Main Street, again, this is officially, if you look at the website, it's under the Office of Urban Development. I have talked to the program manager on this, and unless we get any real resistance, I hope this next year we're going to rename Office of Urban Development, because to me that sounds like going into a large city and maybe working in the inner city or downtown development. And the North Carolina Main Street is really about small town America, small town North Carolina, and working to rehab those vital downtowns. I have a gentleman that I'm working with right now who came to, somebody else brought him to me. Very successful businessman, built a business, got up to about 150 employees, technology-related business, and he had sold it, and he wants to start another business like that one, except all 150 employees in the former business were in one building at the edge of town in an industrial park. His vision today is, I want to build up to 150 employees again. I want to do it 20 or 25 at a time, and I want those employees in small town North Carolina. I want to go to the downtown 3 or 4, 5, 6 block, whatever it is, downtown area, find an empty building on the main street, and then start another technology firm. Now, when he sold his business, he entered into a 4-year non-compete clause, which I think tells you he was probably relatively successful in his business. But his 4-year non-compete is now up, and he can form this business again. We have visited the first town that he thinks he wants to place. We've met with a local developer. But the idea of this program, and he's very interested in this, what can we do for downtown North Carolina? He wants his employees out on the street, eating in local restaurants or buying merchandise downtown. He wants them to become part of the community. There are success stories all across North Carolina, all across the nation on the Main Street program and what it can do for small towns. So that's where we certainly hope to go with that. The Industrial Development Fund, there's a utility account in there. You will hear it referred to as IDF or just the utility fund. This is a fund that was started in Commerce, used to be under Commerce Finance, till legislature put it underneath me when they created the division. That is, if a state incentive through the JDIG program is paid out on the recruitment project, you get a certain percentage of that payment. Does not, let's say you're awarded $1 million grant. Okay, when it's time to do the payouts over a period of years, not all of the payment goes to the company. A certain percentage will stay and gets put into the utility fund for the purpose of working in Tier 1 and Tier 2 counties. The idea being, the philosophy behind it is the idea that if the state pays out dollars to urban areas where typically the large projects go, not always, but oftentimes, then not only are they getting it, but money is reserved as that payout is done, stays in the utility account, and then gets granted out for infrastructure. In this program, there's a reasonable expectation of jobs being created. All the others are job creation. Reasonable expectation, but funds from utility account can be paid for basic infrastructure into an industrial park, into a business park, where there reasonably is expected, if you put infrastructure, and I'm talking rail, gas, roads, water, sewer, that development would take place if that infrastructure were in place. Since we started granting in December, we have awarded 14 utility accounts, $8.8 million with over 700 jobs associated with those investments. This is just our grant calendar for the rural grants for the next year. The rural grants programs, building reuse, economic infrastructure, legislation said we have to meet 4 times a year. We meet 6 times a year on a regular basis. If there's a fast-moving project, we will hold a special meeting for that. The grants programs that I just talked about, the rural grants, the CDBG, the utility fund, when the rural grants were at the rural center, and as I said, I was on the board, I sat on one of the grants committees, we were, I get tired of the word siloed in government, but it's a really good word to use, so I'll use it. Those grant funds that went to the rural center really were siloed as far as were those projects discussed with other projects across the state. The grants managers that work for me that also have been at the rural center a number of years tell me they never remember sitting down at the Department of Commerce across the table from Commerce Finance Division, from the Utility Fund, from the state incentive programs, the state developers, all those people that come together to look at state resources on recruitment projects or granting projects, and never had a conversation across the table. One thing that Secretary of Commerce and certainly some others in state government in these grant funds are certainly trying to get to is look at all projects across the table at the same time and begin to decide, okay, what makes sense for us to grant. It's all state dollars now. It was state dollars before, but housed in a nonprofit that had authority to do, grant the way they wanted to. But now it's all there down on Wilmington Street, all, state dollars. So the way we're working now is Wednesday morning, 8 o'clock, sometimes 7 or 7:30. You're not excused from not attending if you're traveling. You park alongside the road and connect in with a telephone. But there, we're looking at a team of folks, and that team will include all of my programs, includes the state developers that do the large recruitment projects, includes Dad Gerlach with the Golden Leaf Foundation, because they put a great deal of money into some of our projects, and actually share some of our projects, as well as the representative from CDBG and the Utility Fund. All sit together and review every project that has come into the state or every project that is still open with the state and begin to think what makes sense and where should we take the money from. What we are finding and what we are trying to get to, we make better decisions in the use of your tax dollars, but also to more reasonably use those state resources. One project, and I won't name the project or the community, came before us 3 or 4 weeks ago. If they had gone to rural grants, building, reuse, and economic infrastructure, because that need was there, they needed some road and some rail, so they could go to the utility fund. They were already getting a One North Carolina, and they qualified for CDBG economic development. If every one of those pots of money had given them what they could qualify for as far as the amount, we would have been spending close to $30,000 per job created. Now, September 1st, I have to go over to the legislature and give a report on how many grants and how much per job and all that other kind of information to several committee members. When the legislature hears it costs us, we spend $30,000 to create a job. Doesn't matter what kind of job, just $30,000. All of a sudden that doesn't begin to make a whole lot of sense. So what we're now looking at, okay, does this really qualify for CDBG economic development? That's federal money, let's use federal money first. Let's maybe not use this money over here, for that. And maybe the project isn't going to get as much money, but from the state perspective, we're using your resources, we think, much more efficiently. So that's once a week, every week. Another thing we're doing about every, 8 weeks is bringing that same team together, but then inviting other folks in like USDA, the electric utilities, and other entities, rural grants with USDA, rural development, that have granting sources, and begin to look at what kind of projects they're hearing about, what kind of projects we're doing, how can we possibly work together. And that's beginning to have some impact, at least on 2 of the projects I'm working with that begin to bring in some, we think we're going to be able to bring in some EDA money. I'm going to talk a little bit about the new partnership, and I will certainly leave time for some questions. We can finish as early as you'd like to finish. I know you have a bus to catch and a ball game to go to. As you may or may not have heard, over the last year, a great deal of change in commerce in the attempt to form a public-private partnership. A lot of criticism, a lot of praise for it, a lot of different comments about it. As a local developer, now when I was a local developer, I worked directly for the county manager that was manager before me. I was a government employee. I know many organizations across the state that are public-private partnerships where the economic developer is not a county employee. They belong to a 501c3. You may have county money in there, you may have chamber money in there, you may have town money, but lots of different kinds of economic development partnerships. This is not that much different if you look at it that way. Before, everyone at Commerce was a state employee, all the state recruiters, economic developers were reported to the secretary. And this past year, there has been a bill, they tried to get it passed last year, did not pass last year, did pass a few weeks ago, the governor has signed it, to form some of the services into the public-private partnership. This is going to be, this is the initial organizational structure on that. There will be a CEO at the head. There is an interim CEO right now. People ask why you have an interim in that position. Well, there isn't a contract yet since the legislation just passed, but there is a CEO. Under him will be a chief operating officer, the controller, and then the division of tourism, film, and marketing. On the left-hand side of that org chart shows business recruitment with both business development and project management. The business recruitment is going to be headed by David Spratley. David Spratley is a longtime employee of the Department of Commerce. Has done some very large projects in Carolina, MetLife, and some of the others. Under business services, a gentleman by the name of John Loyak will have that side. The existing business, and that has in the past often been referred to as existing industry, both and international trade, and then the small business. That is going to be on the private side of the house. People have questioned whether there's not going to be any transparency over there. There is going to be transparency, and certainly some interaction with the public side of the house that I'm going to sit on, because all that public grant money that these folks are going to want to use in recruiting projects, all that's over with us. So we're, in fact, currently meeting at the time what those bridges are going to look like and how that work will be organized. This is somewhat difficult to see, but I'll just run through a little bit of it. On the left-hand side of that screen are all the things that are going to remain public. The Rural Division, the Division of Workforce Solutions, it's a gentleman by the name of Will Collins, Division of Employment Services, Dale Falwell heads up that group, the Lead Division, the Economic Analysis Division, Commerce Finance, that's Stuart Dickinson's group, that's where the state incentives are, Office of Science and Technology, Dr. John Harden heads up that area. Then we've got the Office of the Secretary, what is under her, Human Resources and Communications. Then over on this private partnership, there's the business development, the business services, and film, tourism and trade, and then also various administrative and some other marketing functions. So when the secretary or when the CEO or COO looks at this, they describe that vertical line that comes down the firewall from the public being separate from the private. You notice it doesn't go all the way to the top or the bottom. I like to explain that line, that there's certainly going to be interaction with the public side of the house as we work projects and try to recruit jobs and private investment to the state. The new model in this private partnership, organizational alignment with greater collaboration. I think what I discussed on with these funders forums and all that we're having, that is one of the areas of collaboration that we are attempting to work with. More proactive in some of the lead generations, flexible to respond to business needs. You know, many of you don't know, if you're a nonprofit, you can often do things in a different way and a little bit faster than if you are a local government. When I was a local developer, we very deliberately formed a nonprofit for real estate deals because it's just too hard to take, if someone's going to donate you property, take it into the local unit of government, and then think you can go do a private deal to get rid of it. It just doesn't work that way. So one of the things we're trying to work here is the flexibility in meeting business needs. Integrative, collaborative strategy, all about leveraging private sector funds to launch new programs, and again, do the recruitment and bring jobs and private investment to the state. With that, I will end my comments. I will be glad to take any questions that you have, attempt to answer them. If I can't answer them, I will try and get you an answer for them. And I'll open it up to questions. Yes?
What determines tier 1, tier 2?
It's a very complicated formula that is based in general statute. There's many, many things that go into it. Population, poverty rate, all kinds of things. But it's all very tied up into general statute. There has been some talk at the state. Has it outlived its usefulness? Should we not have it? There's been some look at, do we need to go to some other system in ranking counties, because there are certainly some tier 3, which is the most wealthy counties, that there's very, very distressed areas in. Iredell, Pender, Moore, and some others. If you begin to look across general statute in any of the economic development and other types of statute at the state, the tier system is just embedded in many, many, many places. So it is not as simple to say, okay, we're not going to rank them this way, we're going to look at them this way. It's just, that's what it is. Yes?
Obviously, there's other tools that are available for economic development, such as community colleges, SBC program, and some of the others, and also some of the other agencies that they're kind of like on the peripheral. Is there like a long-term plan to try to consolidate all the resources, or is the intention to kind of first to focus on what Commerce is doing and get the PPP through, and then kind of try to do better alignment and communication between the others?
That is an excellent question, and I'm glad you brought it up. There has already been some move on the community college part in workforce development training. With the Division of Workforce Solutions that I mentioned is under Will Collins. Reporting to Will Collins is one of the VPs of the community college system. So the community college system and some of that apprenticeship work that they're trying to do and put into the community college, they have already joined those two together that then will report directly to the secretary. So there's recognizing, and I'll say this, and when I was a local developer or county manager, the community college system is one of the very best economic development tools that we have across the state. It's as good as any in the nation, and probably better than 49 other states. So, other questions? Yes.
And I'm a relative novice in understanding all of this, but with the different grant programs you have, do the eligible, aside from the tier system, is there specific eligible entities, or does it vary by grant program and what federal revenue stream that's funding that?
It'll vary by grant program, and if it's federal money coming in like CDBG, then we're going to follow federal guidelines. The rural grants programs are state funded, but that Rural Infrastructure Authority developed the policy as to who, and really they're pretty lax. You don't have to have wage criteria. They don't have to offer, business doesn't have to offer health benefits. Doesn't have to be a certain size business. Now they're going to go back after we've worked with it for a year and revisit that policy criteria. The ARC is federal money, so that has its own set of criteria. So it is all different depending on the funding source and the way the program was established and the guidelines. Others?
Other questions? Pat, I'd be interested in your perspectives about the role of the local economic developer now under this new structure of the public-private partnership. We know the funding's gone away for the regional economic development, I guess regions will get
Partnerships.
Partnerships. So how does the county city economic development office fit into this?
Here is how, speaking for myself, but also conversations we've had at Commerce that I certainly hope it fits into. As the industry, existing industry developers that will be on the private side and the recruitment folks and all, one of the charges they're going to have is to know who those local people are. And of course that road is both ways. And I used to tell the former county manager that I worked for, you know, that road to Raleigh goes both ways. You can't expect Raleigh to come out to Ashe County, it's about as far as you can get. You know, if we're not making trips into Raleigh. So it's, you know, a two-way street. In the rural division, from the rural division standpoint, I am going, depending on what happens with the budget, when we get a budget, I plan to hire 2 other developers that will work directly under me. I'll have one in the west and one in the east. And when you see that job description is that they're going to be experienced, long-time developers. That job description is they're working with those private partnership. They know what's going on with those guys, but they're one of their the criteria in their job description. They're going to know the counties they're working in. They're going to know who the county managers are. They are going to know who those developers are. They're going to establish those relationships, so as well as the other regional alliances, I guess most of them are calling themselves the reformation into nonprofits of the former economic development partnerships. So there's certainly, the intent is a lot of collaboration there and working together across lines. Other questions? Thank you so much for having me.